Alrighty, welcome back everyone to another great episode of The Human Role. So today we have another guest. You guys are by now probably really familiar with him, Bob Pulver. He is the founder of Elevate Your AIQ and another fellow podcaster here. Handles strategic advisory for organizations, really helping them create the future of work through not only talent, but human-centric AI readiness, which we have a whole episode on that from last year. So go and check it out. But Bob, before we get into this AI topic, guys, this is going to be focus on like AI and HR and how like automating work without losing the human role, because I know that that is something that people are really concerned about. But Bob, before we get into that, thank you for being on again. And I love to hear what you've been up to since we last saw you.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Tiana. Things are moving fast around here. The focus for me has been, well, certainly the podcast. I mean, since we last talked, I had my 100th episode. And so we're trucking along. There's just so many great experts to hear from. And as you know, I try to bring on people who are just making a difference. I don't really care what your title is, how big your organization is. I just want to know that you're helping the average person, whether you're in the current workforce or future workforce, you're looking at career transitions and you're concerned about job displacement, you're concerned about where do I move to avoid the sort of whack-a-mole kind of game. I just want to make sure that people are informed and prepared, and they upskill themselves with how AI, what else they can do with AI. So how do they augment their own, skills and capabilities and attributes to be more effective, whatever it is that you want to pursue. So the show's going well, and I'm looking to expand some of the media assets. I'm going to start doing some live shows. I go to events, as you know. I'll be at Unleash next week doing some recordings with some solution providers and hopefully some practitioners to understand how their AI readiness is coming along and their AI maturity, however you want to frame it. But just want to make sure that organizations are evolving and recognizing the value of this sort of human plus AI kind of relationship. So that's where I've been focused, but obviously still trying to help people in an advisory or coaching capacity as they try to navigate this landscape.
Yeah, that's perfect. Shout out to Unleash too. I know lots of people that are going there, but I think just your work that you're doing, you were the first person that popped in my head when I was thinking about talking about this topic, because it just never fails. Anybody you talk to, it's AI, AI, AI. And we know it's here. We know it's, going to obviously change a lot of things, but I want to just jump right in, especially since you're here and I know you're busy, and go through. Obviously, you guys, we may not have all the answers. This is just a current time zone of the knowledge we have. But do you think AI could eventually replace parts of HR or like HCM roles? Like if we think about our space through human capital management and the clients and companies we work for, and just kind of like what that really looks like, which is essentially what you're already doing, coaching through your clients and hopefully their employee population too. But curious to get your insights there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the human centricity focus and theme is really important. And that's what I try to emphasize no matter who I'm talking to, really, because I don't want people to get so enamored and fascinated with what the technology can do that they just start applying it and using it everywhere without thinking more deeply about what is the human impact, both short-term and long-term. And so short-term might be having to do with, job displacement fears, employee morale, engagement. Am I essentially training, my digital, backfill? Is my job going to go away, or is it going to change? Do I have the capacity to change with it in terms of, either upskilling or reskilling, or, spending most of my time on where I used to spend, 40% of my day. Now I might spend 80% of my time there. Hopefully that would be a good thing, but everyone's going to go through their own thought process and analysis. And it also depends on how the organization is thinking about their own AI adoption and what this transformation means to them. So I think depending on where you are in terms of, industry and the appetite and opportunities that your organization thinks about, they may take different approaches. And so I think the ideal scenario is that you go through a thorough analysis and say which of these tasks and activities that we're doing in this particular role, what or who should be doing those tasks in the future. So part of it is just what is your approach to thinking about how to use AI? Are you just trying to make people, X% more efficient, or are you thinking about how to reimagine the work that you're doing and put people in a position such that they feel more engaged, that their morale goes up, they feel like they're learning, they feel like they're adding more value to their customers, to their team? Are they augmenting what they're already capable of, and now they've got freed up capacity to pursue some other areas within the company where they see growth, right? That could be career growth, these other jobs, or as this role is changing, we see a much greater sort of longevity for those types of roles. And so it's really going to come down to how does the organization, think about these things. But I would just suggest if you're an individual contributor or, a people manager, just gauge the trajectory of all of the advancements going on externally, but also, how that gets incorporated inside a company. Because we've seen all the hype cycles, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that your organization is going to follow that hype cycle. You may be an early adopter, you may be a fast follower, or you may be sort of a laggard that says we're going to let other people, absorb some of the risks that we've seen, and we're going to see how some of that shakes out. And that could be legislatively, or just, is one of our competitors, getting backlash for some decision that they made. Let's see how that all shakes out in the court of public opinion and see how that goes. So everyone's going to be on their own sort of trajectory. I think you've just got to, have your eyes wide open and pay attention to how things are moving within your life and your work.
Yes, very true. Just try it out, you guys. Just
Yeah.
don't be scared of it or turn it away. I think the more and more people are now starting to use it, I think there's a more fascination approach. But it's just a fact of, for me personally, it's like, how much are you going to heavily rely on it, AI or not? You still got to spot check some things. It's definitely not perfect, but it solves a blank page issue. I mean, so many times me just trying to figure out something or type it in or just spot check to make sure my outline is good. So it can be really helpful. But continuing to focus on the organization piece. So, what does the human and AI actually look like maybe inside of an HR team? I mean, we know, as mentioned too, that this will be different for all orgs, but I have heard some chat, and I believe you've also from colleagues we're both connected with around at some point AI will be on the org chart, which is very, very different of okay, we're really going to have this. But yeah, I think now, I remember I heard that last year and I was like, whoa, that's a little, I don't know. But now I'm like, oh no, I think, realistically, yes. And for me, I'm seeing a lot of my clients even build their own AI internally. And so now when I'm on with HR teams, they're like, well, I know that's our internal AI, but it doesn't have everything externally. So what's the policy around that? And we're having those conversations. So it is very real. So I'm just curious to get your opinion on how you think that would work within our space.
Yeah, I think there's still two competing schools of thought here, right? One is AI is the next evolution of software kind of mentality, and therefore, treated as such. It's really a mature automation, or what we used to call cognitive automation. So it's got some level of autonomy, and it's able to understand context and basically understand from past decisions that were made probably by humans, how it should act in certain circumstances. And yes, you may have a human in the loop, where in software development, you don't necessarily have that. Once the software has been deployed, you just assume it's running safely and working as designed based on, rules-based, sort of coding and things like that. Whereas AI is constantly sort of evolving. It's got machine learning and reinforcement learning, and it's learning from behavior as people are using it. And so it's also unpredictable in terms of, you don't know what the human is going to request in what form that is going to take. And so it's more sort of open-ended, which is why we need to evaluate these tools thoroughly. The other camp is, to your point about the org chart, are we sort of anthropomorphizing some of the AI? And, because we give it, names, we may come up with as individuals, we may have our own cutesy, names for some of these tools. But when people build, AI agents, for example, a lot of times they give them a persona. They give them not just a persona in terms of, this is a, business development rep, and this is a pick your role, but they'll say, this is, Susie, and this is Lucy, and this is Dave, and whatever. And so it's not just that makes it easier to communicate with these agents, but it's also the fact that as you're training them, you're not training it like you're training software. You are sort of training it like a new employee. Here's what I want you to do. This is how a human, whether that's you or someone on your team, this is how this task is properly executed. It connects, and once that task is done, it connects to these other activities and is part of a workflow. And that's how you sort of string. You can think of an agent as generally doing a single task or activity. And then when you start stringing those things together and you have agent to agent communications, and you can string them into a workflow, that's where we get into this concept of agentic AI or agentic workflows. And so the more agents that you create and the more interconnectedness you create from agent to agent, the more people start to get increasingly concerned about whether or not this is they're being essentially displaced, right? Because I used to handle that whole workflow, and now I'm basically just managing this. So I think there's still two philosophical approaches about whether AI is still treated as or still considered a type of software, or whether this is almost the way that in which you're communicating and the activities that it's doing. It really is acting almost like a person. And there might be situations where companies have competing thoughts, right? Like maybe someone in marketing looks at it more through a human lens because they're trying to teach the AI to be creative and be, I don't know if curious is, I don't know if my AI are being too curious, but there's just different mindsets depending on the context and depending on the type of workflow and the domain that you're in and the context, and also potentially the sensitivity of the data that you're handling. I don't think, if you were someone who works in payroll or, compensation, or you don't want too much, creativity, and you don't want it going too far off of, where you need to have this, structured environment where, you've got very clear, you're working with quantitative data, you're looking at comparisons, you're building, reports on comp plans and doing comparisons with external data and things like that. So it really depends on the nature of the work across different, even the nature across different domain.
Yeah, very true. It's funny when you mentioned the naming of your AI person. So in school, it's funny, a couple of weeks ago, I think a colleague actually asked in a group chat, like, hey, just curious, what's everyone's name for their AI? And everyone just started responding. And I didn't have a name. I just say, hey, friend, when I'm talking about, I was like, I guess that is kind of a name. But some people were fascinated. They were like, wow, I'm so shocked. I haven't even thought about this. Like, I just not my thing. And then some people started asking it on chat, hey, what would you prefer? What would you prefer your name to be? And it was spitting out names that it preferred. So it's kind of funny that how everyone has their own connection to it. And I think that also correlates to in your company's organization. How heavily are you going to use it? Are you going to accept it? Obviously, I think at this point, everyone knows to be very careful about the sensitive data that you put in. So I think from like a payroll stance, very limited on what you can drop in there when you're doing comparisons. Hopefully, people are being that way. But I think it would help automate lots of other things that I've seen. Alerting just mismatches. If someone, I don't know if that would technically be AI, but like if someone has a higher pay this week than next week, and certain things with taxation too, I think that pops up to where you don't have to go searching for certain things. It'll kind of alert you ahead of time. That may or may not be fully AI driven, but there is heavy automation that I've seen across the way, which I think is really good.
There's something about the way in which we train these systems that we need to be careful of within different domains, such that we've got consistent behavior from the solution. So, let's say, customer service or like HR service desk, for example. I mean, there might be some cookie cutter examples. You can't find how many days you have left on, time off, or you're having trouble with benefits, or you need a password reset, or, there's some things that are sort of standard that are easier for AI to handle consistently. But then there's others that might be more sensitive, or exception cases and stuff like that, where, if you're going to attempt to have AI, handle some of those, you still, even though it might communicate in its tone and things like that, might be a little bit, different based on who it's interacting with. To some degree, you still need consistent behavior, and you still need to trust the responses that you're getting from the system. So, all of this can be handled as you're building the solution, telling it what type of tone and how sort of rigid you want the responses to be, but also making sure that you're staying within a certain set of guidelines and making sure that everything that's there is of course auditable, so we can go back and look and see, are we giving consistent answers to similar questions? Because again, people are just freeform asking either verbally or typing the question. People are asking what might be the same question just in a different way, and so you got to sort of reconcile that and make sure you're evaluating some of that, which can be tricky. But that's why evaluations are so important when we talk about like responsible AI and AI governance.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And let's look ahead. So I know not everything is set in stone and everything is ever changing I feel like every minute of every day. There's also lots of pending legislations, but any type of feelings, ideas, conversations that you heard on, what could potentially be most automated in the HR space? I know that there's always, well, at one point last year, it was heavy maybe sourcing or like recruiting side, but now I'm kind of seeing where people still prefer to review resumes. I know when I'm recruiting for my clients, I do prefer that. I will take some of the suggestions from the AI, profile relevances and stuff, but I do prefer to kind of look over things. And now I can kind of tell maybe if someone's resume is too perfect, now I'm suspicious. Now I'm like, I don't know. Let me have an intake call, a screening, and just see. So, but just curious on your thoughts on the future and maybe what might potentially be most automated down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's tasks and activities that people are doing across different domains within HR, and talent acquisition is certainly one of them. Anytime that we're talking about talent in like a decision support tool when it comes to talent, that could be talent acquisition, it could be talent management, talent development, it could be L&D as well. Actually, even compensation might come into play. We just need to be really careful that there's human oversight over all of those things. But as you look at across like core HR, functions, HRIS, administration, if you look across, workforce planning, performance management, benefits administration, all of these areas have a suite of activities that they're either, time consuming or they are routine. There's not a lot of, variability in some of the tasks that are done. I mean, I think those are almost low hanging fruit for AI, which, we'll use the term AI, loosely to incorporate all different types of automation, right? So a lot of, you're developing consistent reports, at the end of the month, whether that's, payroll or projects and other things. I mean, all of that can be standardized. You can reconcile, a lot of accounting tasks and things like that. Any type of reporting that's being done can all be done almost centralized, where we're going to start to see if people are operating in different tools, maybe you don't need all these dashboards anymore, right? Because you can just dynamically call up and use one of these AI tools, to pull in all this data that you need. And so without going too far down this other rabbit hole around what happens with software as a service solutions that you're using already, there is an opportunity to say, why do I have 10 different dashboards and what does this mean? Because that winds up showing up in all those different dashboards, or at least screen captures of those dashboards wind up in reports, and those go to the powers that be across your leadership chain and things like that. So you can consolidate and dynamically create a lot of the information that was currently in sort of disparate places. But as you look at pay equity analysis, as you look at HR service desk and what's going on with call resolution and what are some of the dominant reasons why people are calling, you can start to feed that into a knowledge base that now supports this modern, AI assistant that is way more intelligent than the chatbots of even 5, 6 years ago. And you can start to handle a lot more of those cases, and that frees up capacity. I mean, my old employer, IBM, has done a great job at this, but they've also sort of reinvested to the point we were talking about earlier. They've also reinvested and said, we're going to grow human talent and human capability in these other areas while we use AI for efficiency gains, for scalability, and for consistency across a bunch of tasks and activities that we know are there. So there's no shortage of areas where we're going to see a lot more AI being embedded inside different HR disciplines. What I would say is, as we were talking about this a little bit earlier, if you can recognize, or your organization is transparent and talks about some of the ways in which we're looking to use AI, then that's your cue to start saying, well, what do I do to learn exactly how that's going to work so that I'm in a position to be one of the people that helps to orchestrate and oversee what all these AI agents and assistants are doing? Because the people who grow competency with their own AI literacy, not just, learning how to use ChatGPT, learning to, prompt better or whatever, but really understanding its own logic and how to apply your own creativity and critical thinking on top of that, puts you in a good position to be one of the people who are, still key part of the organization and part of what I describe as the human sort of connective tissue between all these agents, where we really need that institutional knowledge, the relationships, and the context that people are bringing to, solving real problems and generating value for their team and for their organization. So mature organizations are starting to say, individual productivity is great and we want people to learn these tools, but really we need to move from efficiency to effectiveness and value creation. And so I talk a lot about, how this AI literacy, this sort of human-centric AI literacy, winds up fueling growth and fueling, responsible innovation, because now people are saying, okay, well, now that I know what AI can do, I wonder if it could do this. I wonder if it could do that. If it's a big problem, maybe you go out and you find a vendor who has already built, a vertical solution that can help solve some of those challenges. But maybe it's a one-off, and you've been given the agency to go and build something on your own within a controlled environment, but at least you're starting to experiment yourself, and then you can put it through the paces to say, is this secure? Are we ingesting the right data? Do the right people have access to this or whatever? But you can start to take control of your own destiny and start to build some of these solutions for yourself, because they're becoming more and more powerful, and it's becoming easier and easier to do that with some of the tools. But of course, if you're at an organization that has an IT department and has a chief information security officer and a CIO, then, obviously there's people that are going to be, concerned about, exactly who's building what, and are these things production ready? If not, how do we get them production ready? Otherwise, we need to change course. And then, of course, legal and your governance, risk, and compliance people need to be involved there too. But everything's changing really fast, and I just want people to recognize that they have control over their own destiny if they learn what AI is doing and are, I guess, more active in the conversation and get involved as champions and change agents within the organization to say, I'm going to help this organization evolve. And if the organization is thinking long term and thinking through a human centric lens, then they're going to recognize that these are exactly the kind of people that we need to steer this organization towards a prosperous future. And that can be essentially our competitive advantage when everyone is deploying AI. It's the humans and their loyalty and their institutional knowledge and their ingenuity that are going to be the differentiator.
Yeah, one thing you did say was humans plus AI, not humans replaced by AI. And so I think that is such an important note and key takeaway here. But
Yeah.
Bob, this is great. Like, so great. I know you're super busy. So thank you for taking the time to just connect and share your knowledge, and so fast paced. So everything's ever changing. The world in general that we're living in now. I'm hoping that people are not as alarmed as they were early last year. I feel like it was just really kind of like a shocker, but I think now it's like, from at least my network, it's like we're embracing it and trying to play around with it.
Yeah.
There's so many programs out there. I can't even keep up with all of them. I'm like, you use what? Which one do you use for this? Oh, this one for PowerPoint, this one, for, so
I know.
so many things.
So that's a really important point, Tiana. Like, everyone is overwhelmed. I mean, I'm immersed in this every single day and I'm still overwhelmed. So I
Yeah.
just can only imagine what this is like for people who are working 40, 50 hours a week, or they're going to school like you are, on top of everything else. Like, it's a lot and it's moving really fast. I would just say, if you're keeping up with headlines, go deeper than the headlines, because the headlines are headlines for a reason. They're attracting, viewership and readership. Dig deeper, question what some of these folks are doing, because you'll probably see that some of these rash decisions are getting pushed back, like Jack Dorsey from Square, formerly of Twitter, just let go of 40% of his staff. And people are saying, well, what else could those people have been doing? And so it's really a philosophical issue and a cultural issue. It comes down from leadership to say, what are our priorities? How are we being incentivized for some of the decisions that we're making? And are we sacrificing short-term gains for long-term profitability? And let's not forget reputational risk, right? So are we doing the right things for our people? Or are we cutting ourselves off from future talent that would want to come here? So think about your employer brand, think about reputational risk as you make some of these decisions. But yeah, I think there's just a lot of noise out in the market, and just people need to take it with a grain of salt and just do your homework when you have some spare time. Just do your homework and don't always believe the headlines that you read.
Very true. I agree with that. So with that, we will close out, you guys. Thank you so much for listening in, and please connect with Bob if you're not already, because he has extreme knowledge. And as you know, feel free to send him a message on LinkedIn or schedule a call with him, because if you are overwhelmed, like he mentioned, he too knows the feeling of being overwhelmed with so much going on. And so I think just getting some insight from an expert on how you can work through that would be definitely a game changer. So thank you again, Bob, so much for being on. And for everyone out there, I will see you in another few weeks for another great episode.